Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Horror, your sanctuary for chilling tales that unfold in the dead of night. How are you all doing this evening? Are you wrapped up in a cozy blanket, or perhaps listening with headphones while traveling? Let me know where you're watching from. Whether it's a bustling city apartment or a quiet country cabin, I want to hear your story too. Tonight, I have something truly hair-raising in store. A ghostly tale that just might have you double-checking your windows and doors before you drift off to sleep. So, stay with me until the very end if you dare, and don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Now, let's begin our 30-minute descent into darkness. Imagine waking in the dead of night to the sound of frantic knocking on your window, knocking so urgent it seems to rattle your soul. When you finally gather the courage to peek out, you see nothing there but the reflection of your own wide, frightened eyes. Yet the knocking continues. That's exactly how Lillian's ordeal began, on the single most terrifying night of her life. She would learn that some forces, once invited in, cannot be banished so easily. And when her window opened that night, if only for a moment, it let in something far darker than she could ever have imagined. Welcome to tonight's story. I'm your guide through this 30-minute descent into nightmares. Keep your mind open, but your curtains drawn. Brace yourself, because what follows may leave you questioning every soft rap on the glass after midnight. And so, let us begin. Lillian was a reserved young woman who had spent most of her life in a busy city apartment. She rarely ventured beyond the familiar skyline, content to remain in her predictable daily routine. But when an unexpected letter arrived, informing her that she'd inherited an old family house in a remote village, she felt both curiosity and trepidation. The house had belonged to her reclusive great-aunt, a woman rumored to have dabbled in the occult. After a long drive through winding roads and silent forests, Lillian found the house perched at the edge of a lonely meadow. By the time she pulled up the gravel driveway, dusk was pressing in, turning the sky a steely gray. The house was an austere, two-story structure with narrow windows and peeling paint. Something about it made her pause, a sensation akin to being watched. The windows, tall and dark, glinted maliciously in the fading light. She parked her car and hesitated before walking up the porch steps, each creaking under her weight. The front door was an imposing slab of dark wood, etched with faint carvings. At first glance, they seemed like decorative patterns, but if you stared too long, they formed twisted shapes that pricked at your imagination, almost like faces, mouths open in silent screams. Stepping inside, Lillian flipped the light switch. The power worked, though the bulbs flickered uncertainly, like they weren't sure they wanted to stay on. The hallway smelled of old books, dust, and something vaguely metallic. She carried in her luggage, feeling the sense of emptiness closing around her. A quick exploration revealed sparse furniture, a threadbare couch in the living room, a crooked dining table, and an old upright piano covered with a sheet. A wide wooden staircase led to the bedrooms upstairs. She hauled her suitcase up to the master bedroom, presumably her late great-aunt's room. Inside, she found a bed draped with a faded quilt, a tall wardrobe, and a single window that looked out onto the meadow beyond. Wanting to rest, she set her phone to charge on the bedside table. The phone's screen glowed in the dimness, showing no bars of reception. She was alone, entirely cut off from the outside world. As night settled, the house grew eerily silent. The only sound was the faint whistling of wind through the cracks in the walls. She made herself a simple meal in the antiquated kitchen, then returned to the bedroom, drawn by exhaustion. Yet something nagged at her, a pressing sense that the house was trying to communicate. At first, she dismissed it as travel fatigue. She climbed into bed and turned out the light. Darkness flooded the room, wrapping her in an unsettling hush. Then, just as she was drifting off, she heard it. A soft, insistent knock on the window. Her eyes snapped open. She lay frozen, heart thumping, the sound echoing in her ears. No one could be out there, she told herself. Who would knock on a second-story window? The knocking continued. 3 slow, deliberate taps, as though someone wanted to be let in. Summoning courage, she flipped on the lamp. The moment light filled the room, the knocking ceased. All that remained was a hush so heavy it felt suffocating. She thought of looking outside, but dread anchored her to the bed. Eventually, she forced her eyes shut, telling herself it must be a tree branch in the wind. Morning came, bringing a pale sun that offered more light than warmth. Despite a restless night, Lillian decided to explore the house more thoroughly. In daylight, the rooms were just dusty and neglected, not menacing. She combed through closets and cupboards, finding old letters, chipped porcelain dolls, and other hints of her great-aunt's life. A single locked door at the end of the upstairs corridor piqued her curiosity, one that wouldn't budge no matter how she turned the key she'd found. It was as though the house itself guarded a secret on the other side. Downstairs, Lillian lifted the sheet from the upright piano in the living room. The wood was scratched, and a few keys were chipped. She pressed a single key and was startled to hear an ominous, off-key tone echo through the dusty air. The sound reverberated longer than it should have, as if the walls themselves were echoing with disapproval. Feeling an inexplicable chill, she let the sheet fall back, deciding this wasn't the day to unearth musical ghosts. That night, she tried to sleep earlier, hoping to avoid the knocking that still haunted her mind. For a time, she drifted in and out of uneasy dreams. She dreamed of shadowy figures standing outside the windows, their hands pressed to the glass. She dreamed of her great-aunt, standing at the foot of the bed, whispering something she couldn't quite hear. Then, at precisely midnight, a loud rap, rap, rap on the window jerked her awake again. This time, the knocks were more urgent, and her fear was immediate. She forced herself upright, fumbling for the lamp switch. The moment the room lit up, the knocking stopped. She exhaled, heartbeat hammering in her throat. Was this house haunted, or was someone playing a cruel trick? She rose, shivering, and tiptoed to the window. Pulling aside the curtain, she peered out into the moonlit meadow. It was empty. Only tall grass waved in the night breeze, yet the glass panes were flecked with watery smears, like handprints that had trailed down. She touched the glass, cold as ice. Her reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed, as if to say, "Don't open this window." Morning, once again, did little to ease her tension. Determined to find an explanation, Lillian searched the house for any clues about her great-aunt's possible dabbling in mystic arts. She discovered a hidden compartment in a hallway closet, revealing old books with strange symbols. One particular journal caught her eye. It was filled with cryptic notes about the watchers at the window, describing the practice of leaving certain offerings to appease them. The more Lillian read, the more dread coiled in her stomach. The watchers apparently knocked at windows to seek entry, and if one ever let them in, they would latch onto a household like a ravenous parasite. That evening, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed the windows, and thunder rumbled across the sky. Despite her fear, Lillian refused to flee. She was determined to solve the mystery, to free herself from the knocking that haunted her nights. She busied herself in the living room, eyeing the old piano with a fresh sense of foreboding. A single thought nagged at her. What if the watchers want something else? Something I can't give them? Midway through the storm, she heard a key on the piano strike out of nowhere, a dull, haunting note. She gasped and spun around. Another key followed, as though unseen hands tested the instrument. Then the notes grew into a slow, discordant melody. In the flickering light from a single lamp, the keys pressed down on their own, conjuring a nightmarish lullaby. She rushed over to stop it, slamming the key cover shut. The music ceased instantly. No explanation. No sign of any intruder. Just the hush of the storm outside. Unable to shake her nerves, Lillian sought out that locked door upstairs again. She tried the old key in the lock once more, jiggling it, pleading with the door to open. This time, it gave way with a click. Inside, she found a small study lit only by a high window, the glass streaked with rain. A desk stood in the center, cluttered with dusty books and half-melted candles. A pungent odor of incense and old wax permeated the space. On the wall hung a faded portrait of her great-aunt, eyes painted with unsettling realism. Almost immediately, Lillian felt as though the eyes in the portrait were tracking her every movement. That's when she noticed the large mirror propped against the wall. Its surface was dull, but as she approached, shapes seemed to stir within its depths, shadowy outlines shifting on the glass. She felt compelled to step closer, though every instinct screamed not to. In the mirror, the reflection of the room appeared slightly off, like a twisted version of reality. Flickers of movement darted at the edges. Her throat tightened. Then, from behind, she heard the door slam shut. She whirled around to find the study's door closed on its own. The portrait's eyes glowed faintly, as if charged by her presence. Clutching her chest, she inched toward the door and fumbled with the knob. To her relief, it wasn't locked. She fled, slamming it behind her, vowing never to return to that study at night. That third night, the knocks came earlier, just after sundown. Lillian was in the kitchen when she heard them. Rap, rap, rap. Slow and methodical. Every hair on her body stood on end. Refusing to face the window in the bedroom, she stayed downstairs, every light blazing. The hours crept by without peace, the knocks coming from different windows around the house. Each time she'd race to a window, only to find no one there, nothing but drifting shadows. Around midnight, exhaustion overcame her. She slumped onto the couch, lulled into a half-sleep by her own racing pulse. Then a thunderous knock reverberated from the front door. This wasn't the gentle tapping of before. This was urgent, commanding. She forced herself to her feet, heart pounding. She peeked through the door's peephole. At first, she saw only darkness. Then lightning flashed, illuminating a figure standing on the porch. A silhouette, neither man nor woman, cloaked in dripping black. She stifled a scream, staggering back. The figure raised a pale hand and knocked. Again, so hard the door rattled in its frame. Fear warred with curiosity. Should she open the door, or should she call for help? But help was unreachable. No phone signal, no neighbors for miles. The storm's howling wind battered the walls. She swallowed, turning the lock with trembling fingers. The door swung open to reveal nothing. No sign of the cloaked figure. Just cold wind and rain. And yet, an unmistakable presence seemed to slip past her into the foyer, like a gust of invisible air brushing against her cheek. She slammed the door and spun around. Her eyes darted across the living room, scanning for movement. The house felt occupied. She sensed it in the changing air, the flicker of shadows. Then she noticed water dripping onto the floor, droplets forming a trail that led toward the stairs. Something had come in, and it was heading upstairs. Lillian followed the trail despite her terror, flashlight in hand. Each step felt heavier. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the house. At the top of the stairs, she saw wet footprints vanish into the hallway leading to her bedroom. The door was ajar, darkness pooling beyond. Summoning every last shred of courage, she inched forward. Inside, the bedroom was lit by sporadic flashes of lightning through the window. The bed was drenched, the curtains billowing in the stormy wind. The window was wide open. She froze when she realized the glass was shattered outward, as though something had broken in from outside. Yet the footprints led to the center of the room and ended. She heard a soft, labored breathing behind her. Turning slowly, she saw the silhouette standing at the window, half illuminated by lightning. Its face was indistinct, veiled in shadows, but an anguished moan escaped it. She stumbled backward. The figure raised an arm, pointing to the open window. With a raspy hiss, it spoke. "Let me go." The specter glided toward her. In that flash of lightning, she caught a glimpse of sunken features, a face contorted in torment. Was it her great aunt, some other restless entity she had invoked by entering the house unprepared? Her mind reeled with questions. She tried to speak, but fear clogged her throat. The figure advanced, trailing droplets of water that pooled on the floor. With trembling hands, Lillian held up the flashlight as if it could ward off evil. The beam flickered across the apparition, casting a grotesque shadow on the wall behind it. The ghostly hand reached out for her, and her flashlight died, plunging them both into pitch-black darkness. Seconds later, another lightning flash lit the room, and the figure was inches from her face. Gasping, Lillian staggered away, pressing her back against the wall. The figure seemed to merge with the shadows, swirling around the room. A pounding in her ears drowned out the storm outside. Then, the entity vanished, leaving only the open window and the dripping floorboards as proof it was ever there. No longer caring about courtesy or caution, Lillian raced to the locked study, convinced that the answers lay in those occult tomes. She flung the door open, flicking the light switch. A single bulb buzzed overhead, illuminating the dusty desk and the looming mirror. She rifled through the books, breath quick, eyes darting in terror. Thunder rumbled, the storm intensifying outside. Her great-aunt's journal described a chilling ritual. Once you hear the watchers at the window, you must never invite them in. If they gain entry, their darkness clings to the house, feeding off the occupants' fear, eventually claiming their life force. The scribbled notes hinted at one possible escape: perform a banishing. It required a lit candle, a recitation of certain words, and the presence of a threshold, like a doorway under the open sky. Lightning flashed, illuminating the mirror. For just an instant, Lillian saw the silhouette behind her in the reflection, face contorted in silent rage. She spun, but the figure was gone. Her heart pounded. She tore a page from the journal with the ritual instructions and dashed downstairs. She gathered a few candles, matches, and the slip of paper. Her hands shook as she unbolted the front door again, letting the storm's fury whip through the foyer. Rain battered her face, and wind howled against her ears. She lit a candle with trembling fingers, shielding it as best she could from the rain. Stepping onto the threshold, she recited the archaic words scrawled on the page. The storm surged, each rumble of thunder seeming to mock her attempts. Yet she persisted, voice trembling but resolute. As she reached the final line, a bolt of lightning lit the entire yard, revealing multiple silhouettes lurking at the edges of the meadow, scores of them, standing in silent witness, their eyes reflecting the lightning's glare. Fear nearly stole her voice, but she forced the final words out. The candle flame flickered wildly, on the verge of dying. In that moment, a deafening crack of thunder shook the ground. She clenched her jaw, eyes squeezed shut. When the thunder subsided, she opened her eyes. The silhouettes were gone, as if erased by the lightning. A hush fell over the yard, broken only by the steady patter of rain. She felt a shift in the air, a release of the awful tension that had suffocated the house. Lillian stumbled back inside, soaked to the bone, the candle sputtering out. She closed the door and leaned against it, tears mingling with rainwater on her cheeks. The house fell unnervingly silent. No rattling windows, no spectral knocks. A faint sense of calm settled over her, though her heart still raced from the ordeal. Exhausted beyond measure, she slumped onto the living room couch. She must have dozed off because she awoke to a pale, dawn sky illuminating the house. Cautiously, she examined each room. The floors were no longer damp. The shattered bedroom window was still broken, but there were no footprints, no sign of the figure that had terrorized her. Upstairs, the locked study remained open, the mirror dull and lifeless. She couldn't shake the sensation that the watchers had retreated, though whether they were truly banished or merely biding their time was unclear. Over the next few days, she arranged to have the window fixed and the house thoroughly cleaned. Each evening, she braced herself for more knocks, but none came. The watchers, it seemed, had been compelled to move on by the ritual, at least for now. The day she finally decided to leave for good, Lillian paused at the front door, gazing back at the old house. Though it now lay quiet, shadows still clung to its corners. She wondered if her great-aunt had faced these entities alone, succumbing to them in the end. Perhaps that was why the house had gone untouched for so long. She locked the door and dropped the key into her pocket, feeling an uneasy relief. Driving away, she glanced in the rearview mirror for one final look. Through the dusty back window of her car, she could have sworn she saw a figure peering out of the second-story window. Or was it just her imagination? Her pulse quickened. She refused to stop, accelerating down the gravel road until the house disappeared from sight. For the rest of her life, Lillian would be haunted by that question. Had she truly banished the watchers from her ancestral home? Or had she only awakened something that would forever watch from behind the glass? On quiet nights, whenever the wind rattled her new apartment windows, she would sit up, heart pounding, waiting for a knock that might never or always come. Thank you for listening. As you turn off the lights tonight, remember Lillian's story. If you should hear a faint tapping on your window, be certain who or what you let in. After all, some knocks are not requests, but invitations from the darkness that forever lingers just beyond the glass.